This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Hello and welcome to another session of the Living History Project sponsored by the Emory University Emeritus College. My name is John Buga. I'm the interim director of the Emeritus College, and we are engaged in an enterprise that makes use of the stored institutional history of persons who have been at Emory for a good long time. Today we have two eminent emeriti. On my left, Dr. Robert DeHaan, who is Professor of Cell Biology Emeritus in the School of Medicine, and also with an affiliation in the Department of Education. And the other gentleman is probably needs no introduction to many of you. This is Eugene Bianchi, Professor of Religion Emeritus of the Department of Religion and the Candler School of Theology, and also, I should add, the founder of the Emeritus College. We're going to begin with Dr. DeHaan, and since the enterprise is largely autobiographical, that's all I'm going to say. Bob?
Thank you, John. I guess I ought to start off with some little introduction about my own background. I did my bachelor's degree at UCLA in Los Angeles. Went to Amsterdam for a year of research on embryology of the limb. Came back, did my master's, and then PhD back at UCLA. My first job was with the Carnegie Institution of Washington, Department of Embryology. So from 1957 to 1973, I worked as a researcher at the Carnegie, which has its campus on the Johns Hopkins campus, and which is thoroughly integrated and affiliated with Hopkins. And so I was invited to become an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins, did so, worked my way up through the ranks while there. In 1973, I was invited to come to Emory, and that's a long story because the Department of Anatomy at that time was run by Jerry Sutton, who many of you may know, who was the longest running director of any department of anatomy in the country. Jerry invited me because, I presume he liked my research, but also because we had become friends while I was at UCLA, and it was there that we met and our lives became intertwined. So I had known Jerry for many years. I left Baltimore at Johns Hopkins in 1973 and came to Emory with this invitation to be in what was then the Department of Anatomy. My overall interests certainly were not in anatomy. I was a developmental physiologist, but my overall interests were in effect, promoting creativity in science. How do you do that? You do that by bringing together people whose fields are different, whose backgrounds are different, and let them in one way or another interact. And so my first task in that regard, once I got my lab up and running, was in 1974, I established, I re-established a weekly luncheon group called the Tender Heart Club, which I had run for about 16 years at Johns Hopkins. This was a group where graduate students, postdocs, and faculty met over a brown bag lunch to discuss a previously arranged paper or some specific topic. But the trick in that was to bring in people from a variety of different departments, different schools, and different sets of expertise. And that worked wonderfully, and it ran then here at Emory from 74 to 96, which means that altogether it ran for almost 40 years. And I have most of the flyers, the weekly flyers that I used to print out during that almost 40-year period. And it generated at least 4 large dissertation topics and many collaborative research projects. I then ran my lab and did a lot of research and put out a lot of papers in my own field of cardiac developmental physiology, but I was also, and have also for a long, long time, been interested in thinking, how we think. What is the difference between scientific thinking and ethical thinking, for example? Part of what led me to that was that I began conversations with a number of colleagues here at Emory in the humanities. And that led then to the decision that maybe we ought to generate some sort of a major university-wide symposium. And we took that idea to Jim Laney, then President Laney, and of course he was thrilled with the idea, supported it all the way, brought us together in he hosted an organizing meeting at the President's mansion. And it just so happens that at that same time, Billy Fry, who was then provost, had a request from the local Phi Beta Kappa chapter to do some sort of a big celebration of their 50th anniversary on campus. So we combined forces and decided on a major symposium that included, and we invited people like Leon Cooper, who is a Nobel Prize winning physicist, Stanley Cavell, Judith Shklar, and a number of other really remarkable intellects to come for, I think it was 2 days, as I recall, and discuss, give talks and discuss. We had students, we had faculty. It was a wonderful experience, and it became sufficiently well known during the course of the process that the editor of Daedalus asked us if we would like to do an issue based on that Intellect and Imagination Symposium. I was really very proud and very pleased and very gratified that that went on, and I think it was a spur, in effect, to the whole campus for some more of this idea of let's not be in our individual silos. We get more productivity, more creativity if we really have opportunities to
talk about.
Just to
interrupt you for a second.
Yes, please.
George Trakas did that special.
That's right, George.
The special environmental feature.
Yeah, called
and he came
Source.
back recently and got a degree. So in a way, the remnant of that is not only in Daedalus, but it's also right here on campus.
Yes, absolutely.
In the ravine.
Absolutely.
Off the quadrangle.
Yeah, and it was great fun sort of selecting we had a group, a committee, to select. We decided we wanted, and President Laney agreed, that we wanted some kind of a commissioned event, and George turned out to be the lucky recipient, and he's wonderful, and you're right. I had a chance to have lunch with him when he was here a couple of months ago to get his honorary degree. And he's still working hard, just as natural and unassuming as ever. That was in 1978, 78, 79. The Daedalus issue came out in 79. Again, I buried myself in research for the next several years. And then in the spring of 1988, Don Humphrey, who was then one of the deans in the medical school, asked me to become the first director of what was then called the Division of Biological and Biomedical Sciences. Well, I didn't want to give up my lab and take that on, so I took it on for 3 years as a kind of a part-time. It was supposed to be half-time, but it was much more than that. And that was also a wonderful opportunity, and the reason I accepted was because of this kind of theme that I've had throughout my entire intellectual career of bringing good minds from different areas together so that they can interact. And the GDBBS graduate was added later, and so it's now called the GDBBS. In its first year had 6 graduate students, the idea being to bring them in to the division and then let them select from among all of the different departments within the medical school and the college to select a thesis advisor and a project, and usually a committee composed of people from several departments. And this worked wonderfully, and the evidence for that is that it went from 6 students to the most recent numbers I could find were 400 students in the GDBBS with about 300 faculty involved.
Bob, were you inspired at all when you did that particular thing by the Institute of Liberal Arts, which in the arts had a similar way of letting them pick and choose all around the university?
That's right. I knew about, and inspired is not quite the right word, but I recognized that that could be a precedent, and it certainly was, and I think it worked. And so that went from 88 to 90 when I was director and running a fairly big lab and doing this. Along with this interest in, for example, the difference between ethical thinking and scientific thinking, is my idea that not only should we be bringing scientists and others, scientists and humanities people, together to kind of rub their ideas against each other, but also we should be teaching in that way. I've been interested in pedagogy for a long, long time. But anyway, the ethics idea, the question, I minored in philosophy in college and have been interested in ethics for ever since. I started looking around campus. This was probably in while I was director of the DBBS. I started looking around campus for ways to get students, especially students, involved in ethical thinking, to get either them to take courses or to have ethicists of various kinds. And I didn't really know at the time what was going on, so I started inquiring. And to my amazement, there were 6 or 7 ethics-related activities. I happened to be playing tennis with Nick Foshin at the time, and which I no longer can do. But Nick and I sat down over coffee at one point, and I asked him the same question, and he named 6 or 7 ethics-related activities, most of which were not matched by my list. And so I said, how could it be that there are 10, 12, 15 ethics-related activities with no coordination, nobody knowing, or very few people anyway, knowing all of the things that are going on? Why don't we try to set up a committee and see if we can coordinate that? And Nick thought it was a great idea, and so we did. We took this idea, let's see, was that to Billy Fry? I think it was. Anyway, we established a committee of other science and ethics related people and religion related people. And again, the idea was very warmly accepted by the administration. We hosted an organizing meeting, and in effect, out of that idea grew the Ethics Center. And I was asked to be the first, what do you call it, part-time, sort of non-professional, I certainly am not a professional ethicist, leader or director or guide just to get it, help to get it off the ground. And then that was in 92, 93. And then in 94, Jim Fowler agreed to become the full-time director and has done a spectacular job of growing that ethics center. There was one other thing that happened. I don't know whether it had more or less impact community-wide, but a student, a lovely young woman named Frances Dabney, came into my office once. I used to take undergraduates all the time in my lab to do 10 or 12 week or 1 semester rotations doing an experimental kind of project. And Frances came into my office and we talked about the usual chick heart kinds of things. And then she said, "Do you do anything with teaching? I would love to have a way to somehow get science into schools." And that suggestion was one that was just, many of you may know that this was in 1993. In 1996, the first national science standards were written by a group run by Bruce Alberts, who was then head of the National Academy of Sciences. And I had been involved from 93, 94 in some of the early planning of that. And Frances's suggestion hit right bang in the middle of that question of how do we, now that we can set some standards of what children ought to know about science, how do we do it? How do we get scientists in the classroom? How do we get active teachers already to, who are already teaching, who may be intimidated by science? How do we do all of this? And so on the basis of Frances's ideas and energy, we just arbitrarily said, we're going to start a program. My grandson was then in the 4th grade. And so, and of course I raised my grandson. I knew his teacher and the principal of that school, Morningside Elementary, which is well known now. And so I went to the teacher and the principal, told them about this idea of how could we get Emory students into classrooms. And Frances invented the term science partner. And so the people I talked to at the school seemed to like the idea. And lo and behold, we had a few teachers taking Emory students at first, and then every teacher who had one, whose neighbor teacher in the next classroom decided she wanted one too. And so the thing grew by like topsy, and in 1995, we submitted a National Science Foundation grant, which got me to be the director of a $5.7 million project called ESEP, Elementary Science Education Partners. Again, the whole ethos of the thing was to get teachers to teach teachers how to use this idea of combining what they're teaching in math with what they're teaching in science, and combining what they're teaching in geography with what they're teaching in science, in order to get the kids excited and recognize the relevance of scientific thinking. So that went for another 5.5 years. In 2007, I wrote my last scientific paper. I told Barry Scher, who was by that time chair of the Department of what had morphed into the Department of Cell Biology, that I would retire when I reached 70, which was in 2000. And so I did, and then I joined the Emeritus College, and here we are. Do you have any thoughts about all of that, Gene?
Well, yes, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, Bob, when you said that you were very much in your area one who got people to cross disciplines,
Yeah.
to learn from one another in that way, you know, in ethics and science. And then I think, you know, you really were a pioneer in this childhood science education, you know. Terrific.
Oh, thank
You
you.
know, it's a new thing. 2 or 3 months ago, Rick Moody, who is the director of the AARP's, you all know what that is, for the old folks, he's the academic office director, and he wrote an endorsement for the reprinting of 3 of my books on creative aging. And he said in the endorsement that Bianchi scouted out certain areas. So if I were to cover, I would just say a word that covers everything I'm going to say. I think I am something of a lucky scout. You know, not an explorer. I mean, I'm not Vasco da Gama or Charles Darwin, but someone who is lucky in that I came along at, I was in the right place at the right time, and I'll explain that a little bit right from the start, and then was able to move into territories. And so I grew up in Oakland, California, in an Italian-American, Italian immigrant family, although my mother was born here. You need to know a little bit about this early life in order to see why Emory would have hired me in the first place. But it wasn't for that. It wasn't for being an Italian-American. I did go to Catholic schools, and then I entered the Jesuit order, and I was in the Jesuit order for 20 years. And here's a little bit of the lucky stuff that allowed me to become a scout of sorts. The Second Vatican Council was a major rethinking in the Roman Church in the 1960s. It's still trying to be, you know, it's still in a battled, exploratory situation with conservatives and liberals. But anyway, I came along right at that time, which then allowed me to go to Union Theological Seminary and Columbia University as the first priest in that doctoral program. And 10 years earlier, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But that was just what happened then. And it ties into Emory, too. Because when I came here in 1968, there were people like Bishop Cannon still around, and he had been to the Second Vatican Council. But more than that, the religion department here was looking around for some kind of Catholic who knew something about other parts of Christianity and maybe something beyond that. And so here was Bianchi, you know, coming out of Union and Columbia. That probably helped me get a job here in 1968.
Excuse me, Gene. Before you go on, before you came here, I understand that at Santa Clara, you founded a center for the study of contemporary values. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yes, just very briefly. I founded a center there with the help of the president of the university, who was a very open-minded man, in which we would bring critical thinkers onto campus. And I'll just give you an example of one that would stir some people up negatively, whatever, but it would get conversations started on issues. For example, I invited Herbert Aptheker, the famous American communist, to campus during a Christian Marxist symposium that we had. We did that sort of thing. You know, and the president stood behind me. He got letters. It wasn't as bad as the Death of God situation at Emory, but it was that sort of thing. But he helped.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
There's that. Then at Emory, I would say that I was lucky in landing in the religion department because I had such wonderfully supportive colleagues. Will Beardsley, Jack Boozer, Martin Buss, John Fenton, and they were both intellectually stimulating, and in a way it was a place for me during more critical, difficult times of my life, which I'll mention again, or I might as well mention them now, to find a kind of stabilizing and helpful place to be. In other words, I love what I was teaching and researching and studying, but it was also a real community of scholars who were supportive in many ways. And you know, I mentioned that I'm not going to talk about this now. You can read my recently published memoir on it, but there's a lot in here about the ups and downs, the emotional ups and downs in my life, which I'm leaving aside. But that is also an important piece of my life. And all of it happened, those main events happened here at Emory. And then I will tie some of that in, but not talking explicitly about it, to what I'm going to say next. One of the things I was able to do in my scouting here at Emory, to continue that metaphor, was to start new courses. That was a good thing about the department. As long as you could handle the traditional courses, which I did, like teaching them historical courses and Bible courses and other courses that were more traditional, as long as you did that, you could branch out here in new zones. So I taught the first Man-Woman Liberation course, which now I have a whole women's studies program, in 1970. I taught a course on Whitehead, process thought and religion, and process theology here. And then I also organized a national meeting at Emory around 1978, where I met my present wife, on developing a curriculum for a National Peace Academy. We brought people from all around the country to do that. Also, on the graduate level, I developed a course on Jung and religion. Now, again, I'm tying this back into my own personal life, because for me, I've always had to have, for my books or articles or courses, something of a rather deep personal interest in the material. And when I was going through one of my first psychological crises out on the West Coast, I got in with a Jungian therapist, and I began reading Jung like crazy and everything about it, and brought this course back to Emory. Just as during that time in California, I ran into somebody who had lost his wife, a teacher at Sacramento State, who taught a course on death and dying. I sat in on his course and brought that course back. And then there were other new courses in the college, like I mentioned death and dying, but religion and dreams, and I've been very interested in the psycho-spiritual aspects of religious studies. And again, they have always tied in some way with personal spirituality or personal psychological issues in some way. Not totally, but in some way. Now let me just switch over to other scouting endeavors in a way. When I left the order in 1968, I was the first president, I became the first president of a Catholic reformist group of married priests, which now has women involved in the ministries and have a wonderful ministry. But it was called Society of Priests for a Free Ministry. And it was sort of, the idea was, okay, here's the hierarchy. They don't want to have married priests. They don't want to have women priests. But at that time, we couldn't push the women in 68. But we said, well, let's go out as priests and just do it, and then see what they say. And of course, they didn't like it. And but that was part of that was in a sense more oppositional than in my scouting at Emory. I mean, just going out doing that sort of thing, talking to different groups, both priests in the church and those who had left. And now this group, Society of Priests for a Free Ministry, is called Federation of Christian Ministries, and it has extensive ministries all around, prison ministries, women involved, women certified, and that sort of thing. So sometimes it takes a little aggravating scouting to go out and push a little and let the authorities not like you, and then they eventually catch up. Now oh, they haven't caught up yet in the Catholic Church, but they will. Maybe 100 years after I'm gone. No, it'll happen faster than that. Even women priests, it will come, believe it or not. Yes, and I was also on with other reformist kinds of groups, like Corpus, which continues on today in the Catholic Church, or the Association for the Rights of Catholics in the Church, served on their boards, and so on. And then writing all the time, writing articles and books and teaching. Now, later in my career at Emory, in the around 1979, 1980, I began research because I thought there really was an unexplored area here in the field of aging, spirituality of aging, creative aging, it wasn't just counting how many old people went to church. What was it like to age? And who could tell me what it was like? And so I did a good deal of research then, and because I, by 1980, began to say, you know, I'm in middle life, and when I look in the mirror, I can see that the sands have halfway gone through the hourglass. You know, I better find out about aging. So that was a piece that came out of my own experience too. I started a course on religion and ecology, and now, I mean, I didn't cause the whole ecology department to start here at Emory, but it was a beginning. It was a beginning in that kind of thinking in the 1980s. And then another area, which I don't want to leave out of this because it's very important for me as of right now even, is that from the time John Fenton came and gave the first courses at Emory on Buddhism and Hinduism, I began to get an interest here at Emory in Eastern spirituality, Eastern religion. And then later, Lobsang Tenzing, who is now, he was a Buddhist monk, he is now a professor here at Emory, and teaches, you know, in Buddhism. But when he first came here as a monk, he had meditation groups that I would go to, and a way of not only intellectually but in practice getting in touch with Eastern spirituality. And this has really been important for me because, as I say in my memoir, I see myself as a Christian, Buddhist, Taoist, liberal. I mean, I'm not really, you know, I care about the Catholic Church, and I'd like to see these changes happen. But my own spirituality is really in some ways beyond that, beyond worrying about that. You know, I'm just trying to find, as Teilhard de Chardin said, il faut finir bien. We have to finish well in this life. You know, what do we do? What kind of spirituality do we bring to this last season? And I find great wisdom, and not only in Buddhism, Taoism, and Christian mystics, and the contemplative life, but also in my blue-eyed cat, Max, who is a wonderful purr, and he meditates with me. And so that may lead me into some final statements here about, oh yes, of course I have to mention the Emeritus College. Yeah. And that was also maybe being at the right place at the right time and being able to scout a few things. I knew that in California they had developed Emeritus College type program, especially in Southern California. So I went to a conference that USC was sponsoring in San Diego and got to know the people there. Came back, talked with the provost here. All of a sudden I'm having a senior moment. What was her name? It'll come right back.
Rebecca Chop.
Rebecca Chop, of course, a fellow theologian, was now president of the university, I think. And Rebecca got us started, but we also got a committee together, which John was one of the 12, and we would meet in the dining room here and talk about what sort of Emeritus College program should we have. We drew up papers, but it was Rebecca Chop that got us started, and then, as they say, the old cliche, you know, the rest is history, and you all know the history, and we're sitting right in the middle of that history. And so I would say now, in a way, I'm scouting, as I said, ways of being poetic. I've gotten into writing poetry, revising old poetry, and that's one of the things I'm doing now. But also, and I must say, with the help of John Buga, who's become a critic, a very helpful critic of my work, but also I'm doing a blog on creative aging, and every week, and then I care about the garden. You know, I mean, in a way, I'm returning to the garden. I mean, my memoir's title is "Taking a Long Road Home," and home for me now is our plot there on the Oconee River in Athens, and it's really a wonderful, magic kind of place with a great garden, and I find that to be a good place for contemplation at this stage of my life. What have I missed? Is that good enough?
Well, I would like to ask you then, Could you expand a little bit more, since we're, as you say, in the midst of the result of the establishment of the Emeritus College, could you expand again a little bit more on the early years? How did it go? I think, as a matter of fact, I was a member of that group of 12.
That's right, you were.
But you know vastly more than I do about the workings in that first couple of years.
Well, of course, there's the physical part of it, where we were on the Briarcliff campus, and Rebecca Chubb told me, well, just walk around in the building, Gene, and see that old beat-up furniture from the Georgia Mental Health operation, and you can have what you want. So we gathered old pieces of furniture, and we started the Orange Gallery, which is still going on. I see upstairs of art done by Emeriti, their spouses, and others. But a person who was extremely helpful to me in those early years is Rhonda Dubin, who worked with me right up until 2007, I think, when I was 2007, I believe it, nearly, yes, when she left. But she got to know everyone that you could get to know around Emory, and was able to contact people and be in touch. And I don't think I could have done as good a job as I might have done, as I did possibly, without Rhonda's help. I mean, she was tremendously important in this. I really want to say that. Sure. And then, of course, we know the programs. We have speaking, and we have lunch and dinner programs. We have special guest speakers. We have the chef, and now we're working toward that the endowment of $50,000, which we're pretty close to, or for sustaining projects that are going to be good for Emeriti, good for the university, and good for the community. It's like kind of pro bono explorations of some kind.
Yeah, great, great. All right, if we have a few more minutes, I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit more about, since the term creative is in there, what you mean by creative aging, especially since I want to know about creative and I am aging.
Robert, first you're going to have to read my blogs.
Okay.
You can find them on bianchibooks.com. They're all lined up. The last one was on now, and I'm talking. I have about 3-4 paragraphs there on living in the now, trying to get to the now, enjoying the now, Eckhart Tolle, and all that sort of stuff. Creative. There's so many ways of extending one's talents outward toward the community, but also inward, and exploring new regions of oneself, and not getting caught in older age and just repeating the same old, and of just not agitating the circuits between your ears. I mean, and I think that this is a problem. I mean, but I don't know whether it has, of course I'm not a scientist, I don't know if it has something to do with senility and dementia, but I think it might have in some people, unless you're really genetically programmed toward that, a way of keeping people more alive if they're involved in intellectual, emotional, artistic, spiritual, meditative, friendship issues. You know, and that's the way of staying creative in some ways, saying too much in too few words, something like that. I find myself happy enough with some physical disabilities, but really happy enough in my 80s to want to keep exploring things, you know, and want to keep scouting things out, whether it's politics, or, you know, staying abreast of what's going on in the elections, and so on. You know, there's so much in reading.
What do you think about mindset?
Painting.
What do you think about mindset? I just went through an awful period with pneumonia and lung surgery, etc. And I determined at the very beginning that I was not going to take on the mindset of being a sick person. This was just a temporary problem. And I have since spoken to a number of physicians, especially the surgeon who removed 1/3 of my lung, who agrees with that, who says too often his patients and patients in general get sick and then take on that mindset of being a, quotes, sick person, and they go downhill from there.
Oh, I think that's right.
Whereas if you can, despite the illness or the setback, if you can retain your self-concept of being a healthy person as soon as possible, it seems to help enormously.
Yeah, in a way, that's right. In another way, just recently there's new study on the placebo effect, and I'm going to just turn it quickly around here. That in a way we can do self-placebos for ourselves. That, and I know I'm not clear in this, but let me back up just a little bit. What they're finding is that drugs for some depressed people who aren't terribly depressed, middle range, lower, that the drugs don't do them any more good than the placebo effect.
Oh, yeah.
And the placebo effect is something going on, as you were saying, in your mind, your attitude,
Sure.
and in the, you know, you can heal yourself, you're going to be all right, or however we do that. So in some ways, what you were just saying about not being overcome by illness is true. And I keep trying to tell myself that. Mine is just more periods of fatigue that
Oh, yeah.
come on. You know, it's, but then I say I talk to my inner glucose delivery system, and I say, come on now, don't let me down, because that's really what it is.
Oh, sure.
Glucose going to the cells. It used to go much faster when I was 40 years old.
Yeah.
When I was your age. You're not 40 yet. That's right. I mean, that's so true, to try to stay in.
Is that an idea that you touch upon in some form in your creative aging writings?
Yes. I'm like, just to go back to the recent blog I just put out this week on now, I mean, some people keep rehearsing and rehearsing the past, which happens to be negative for them. They can't let it go.
Yeah.
They can't be good Buddhists in a certain way and say, these are just thoughts, emotions from the past. Here I am now. I don't have to be besieged by them.
Okay.
You know, this is where I am, where you live now. It's
Yeah.
along that line.
Yes. Very good. My wife is involved now, just started a meditation course on just exactly that, on, what do they call it? Mindfulness meditation, which is exactly what you're talking about concentrating on being in the now. I'll tell her about your blogs. And
yeah, please do, and she can visit them at my,
sure.
At bianchibooks.com.
Okay.
I'm always doing advertisements for
Yes,
myself.
I've
in
noticed.
my book and now my website.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I, you said something there that I was going to. Right, I find meditation extremely helpful, and sometimes it's content meditation, and sometimes it's just silent meditation. I also find some forms of yoga. I don't do a lot of yoga, but every morning, 24/7, as they say, I do some exercises that are somewhat meditative movements, just movements. 5 minutes, 6 minutes, just to, but getting into that realm of life, I think, is really important.
Actually, what I do instead of meditating is now 2 hours, because I'm trying to regain weight and regain muscle mass, is I do really strenuous exercise. I do weight training, I do push-ups, I do, well, modified push-ups at this point. And it is amazing how beneficial that has been. I lost 33 pounds in the course of a couple of months as a result of this illness. And I've now gained back 20 of those 33, purely on the basis, my doctors say, of this very vigorous, well, I'm in a pulmonary rehab program which is very strenuous, and my home, in effect, gymnastics. But I, at 81, am really pleased at how much it's possible to do.
I can confirm that specifically because my wife has gotten me into seeing her personal trainer, who has set up a program for me that I do religiously twice a week. It takes a little over an hour at the University of Georgia gym, and there are 9 exercises plus 20 minutes or so on the treadmill.
Yeah.
And no, it really, I think, makes a huge difference.
Oh, absolutely.
In your whole physical, mental.
Exactly. Sense of well-being for me.
Right. Well, that's terrific. So we drifted off away from Emory to tell ourselves how to age well, which is all right.
That's called creative aging.
That's right, creative aging. No, but Emory really has been, for me, a very good place to be. I'm pleased by so many of the people I've met here over the years. And then one more thing about the Emeritus College that may be, for me personally, one of the best things of all, is that I've gotten to know people like you better, or Marianne Robert DeHaan. All these people, I wouldn't have known them if I had just gone through the religion department and then retired from that. But think of the people that I know now in medicine who retired. Carl Hug, all these, John Steinhaus, who just died.
Yes.
He's got to write a letter to his wife. So many people. It's so extended. The Emeritus College has so extended my network of friends and of people that I know.
Yes.
It's just, now that's a marvelous part of this.
Yes, I agree with you.
It's sort of, in some way, goes back to what you said about cross-disciplinary too, because I wouldn't have known people in that much in the business school, Jack Sheth, in other areas all around the university.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would like to second your comment, as long as we're doing commercials here, on the wonderful, wonderful time I have had at Emory. I came from Johns Hopkins and the Carnegie to Emory, and I can't say, the first chairman I had, Jerry Sutton, was just a dream to work with, one of these guys who sets you up and then lets you alone. And every time I've had one of these crazy ideas to do something, I've always met support and encouragement. My life at Emory for, let's see, since 1973, 5 years later than you, has been just wonderful, has been just very supportive. I couldn't have asked for a better career.
I'm going to mention something, then you could say something similar to it, but something I didn't mention was how another good thing about being at Emory was that in the area of religious studies, Emory really exploded and expanded since I came in '68.
Oh, boy.
We now have, I would say, we probably have one of the best graduate divisions of religion in the country. One of them, I think we would pretty easily be among the top 10. But and that all happened since '68 to quite an extent. The people before helped us set it up. And of course, there's Jim Laney's the president of Emory and formerly dean of the School of Theology. The great gift he got, it was at 79 or so, 1979, from the Woodruff Foundation, helped to push that forward. But Emory is, there are pros and cons to this too, of course. When I came in '68, we were really a good regional, provincial school. And now, we've exploded outward in all these different sciences and so on to become an international university. And there are the pros and cons of that, because you lose something of that closeness or that you had in the smaller school. But do you want to comment on that in terms of sciences and so on?
In terms of science, it's like night and day. That is, we now, when I came in '73, the decision had just been made by the various members of the administration to try to grow the university into a national institution. And I must say, we have succeeded as well as one could imagine in these 30 years or more. And it has made all the difference. As you say, we're now on the map. And one of the things that we're very well acknowledged now for is teaching in science, as well as doing science. I just got a paper published in Science on teaching, on promoting creativity in scientific learning. I don't think I would have gotten that paper accepted in that prestigious a journal had it come from Emory at the time in the 70s, because it really makes a difference, you know, the institution. And that leads me, if we have another couple of minutes, to ask you about that issue of teaching ethical thinking versus teaching scientific thinking. What would you say about that? Have you ever thought about the way scientists think and problem solve? And have you ever tried to compare that with how a philosopher or an ethicist thinks and problem solves?
Somewhat, but you know, I don't. I mean, that is the topic of a seminar. I don't know how much we can say about it really briefly. You know, teaching morality and teaching science, but and that's what the Ethics Center, in some ways, was about.
Yeah.
But it does bring up just a little sideline issue here. I'm kind of slipping off of it, not totally unrelated, about teaching, though. That is something I've always tried to do in my classes is to make them a little more experiential, existential. You know, I would introduce 5 minutes of meditation in a class sometime, you know. Or I would take the students down to the George Tracas ravine down there, you know, and do a little reflecting on ecology and spirituality. There are ways of sensitizing people beyond just the exchange of ideas, which is a kind of moral training in a way.
Absolutely.
So I think that is just a little piece of it.
Yeah.
Big topic.
Yeah. Well, but the experiential is in fact a major piece. Certainly in teaching science, that's one of the things that we have learned through really good education research or psychological research, and that is that if you give students ideas to memorize, they don't learn them, they don't understand them, they can't use them as well, nearly, as if you allow them to experience things related to those ideas.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I suspect the same thing is true in the ethical and philosophical world.
Oh, I think it's true. Just another little thing that I was involved here at Emory is that, along these lines, is that I learned to do Tai Chi. I've been doing it for some years. And I would begin classes, just take a minute or two, to get the students out of the kind of chattering mode, to get quiet, stand up, and do some Qigong exercises, which are a stationary form of Tai Chi, really, and do just a few Qigong exercises. I mean, it's all just experiential. I mean, I'm not putting the whole class into that for the whole hour, but just a little bit, or at the end when it was appropriate. When you're teaching a course on Christianity and Buddhism, which I did even spirituality, 5 years after I retired in the college, well, that sort of lends itself to 5 minutes at the end of meditation.
Sure.
And at the beginning, a little bit of Qigong. You know?
Yeah. One of the fascinating things that's now grown out of that is this whole Buddhist, Zen, or Tibetan Buddhism relationship to science, where a number of my colleagues, for example, have been sent to Dharamsalam.
Yeah, Dharamsalam in India.
In India to work with the Dalai Lama and or his monks on how can they think about science, and vice versa. As you know, many have come here to do those wonderful mandalas, but also to learn, to exchange, I shouldn't say learn, to exchange ideas about their ways of thinking and scientific ways of thinking. And some fascinating work is coming out of that.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's right.
Okay.
Well, I am delighted to have shared some ideas and pontificated here a bit today. And I'm delighted to be with my good friend, Bob DeHaan.
Well, thank you. And I'm equally delighted, equally gratified. And I think this project of the living history of Emory is a wonderful project. I think it will be valuable not only to Emory, but to others as well. So thank you for giving us the opportunity.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.